Today I'm going to be showing you guys how I like to build teams in VGC. So in my opinion, the most important thing, even before we pick the Pokemon or the core that we're going to build around, is what is your purpose with the team, or what is your goal, I should say, with this team, right? Is your goal to go out and win a regional? Is your goal to go, play locals and have fun? Are you playing, your favorite Pokemon on the ladder, for example? Are you trying to, get rank 1 on ladder? A lot of that, comes into consideration for me, at least when I'm building a team, right? Personally, when I'm building a team for a regional, I put a lot more, effort, and, go into a lot of the smaller minor details, making sure I've got, really good matchups to everything. If I have issues with those matchups, I'm running down the lines. In today's video, though, we don't have time to do any of that kind of stuff. So what we're going to basically be going over is a team that I have decided to build. This is the team I'm using on ladder. The goal for this team really is just to be able to get to high ladder, right? The goal was to get to the top 500 on the, the showdown ladder with it, which I managed to do with it, and pretty quickly as well with that. And basically, I guess jumping straight into it here, I ended up deciding the Pokemon I wanted to build around was Metagross. So the reason I wanted to build around Metagross was this was the one that really interested in me coming into the format, right? This is a Pokemon that, has a steel typing, hits pretty damn hard when you have a look at the mon. Its bulk's decent, HP is pretty average, but I mean, it's pretty decent as well. Probably, a little above average. Defensive stats really good. Its attack stat is absurdly high. Special attack stat is a little higher than you'd like. Really, it's just a wasted stat anyway. And then its speed stat, while is low, is not in the worst speed tier. 70 is still an okay-ish speed tier. It can play in both Trick Room, and it can play in Tailwind if you want. And it also pairs decently well with things like Icy Wind as well, right? So now, the most important thing, which I guess for me at least, I picked my Pokemon, right? So I'm going into this with a Pokemon, not a core in mind. Now the goal really for me is, once I've picked this mon, my goal is to really just kind of research this mon, kind of figure out what makes this mon good, right? So as we said, this one has a really, really good attack stat. 135 is really, really nice. If you take a look at its physical move pool, for example, right? We scroll down, you take a look at basically some of the moves it's got that are good, right? So Heavy Slam's a really, really nice addition that this mon just got. You go down, Psychic Fangs is also pretty good. Iron Head is not too bad. Slightly worse than Meteor Mash, but it's more, accurate. In my opinion, Heavy Slam is just the better move on this mon, though. You keep going down, it's got things like Stomping Tantrum, which is really good because this mon does struggle to hit, Steel and Fire type, so ground coverage is always fantastic for it. Knockoff could be decent for support, but Bullet Punch is, another major thing here, right? Because Bullet Punch is also a really, really good stab move to have into Flutter Mane, which is without a doubt one of the best Pokemon in the format, right? Other things you can look at too is this mon's abilities. Light Metal really does nothing for it, but Clear Body is fantastic, especially when a Pokemon, like Incineroar is running around with, very high usage, and, obviously spamming out Intimidates. So basically, that's just a quick rundown of, what the mon can do. But normally when I'm also trying to, figure out what a mon can do, especially if it's a mon I don't necessarily have the most experience with, which, by the way, I should probably mention, when you're not, super certain with, the team, or maybe you're not super confident in your knowledge of the metagame, the most important thing you can do really is just play the game. I probably should have said that at the start, but yeah, honestly, if you feel like, for example, I know a lot of this stuff off the top of my head because I played, thousands of games of Regulation F at this point, but if you have not put in the time like I have, or, you just maybe you don't have the time for whatever reason, right? I do think playing is very, very important, right? So even just jumping on ladder using other people's teams can also be very, very important, right? Basically, I know Metagross, right? This is a very, strong physical attacker. I know the kind of moves and the kind of items I want to use, but I'll also just, I guess, give you guys a bit of a rundown on, kind of ways I like to look at Pokemon, especially if I'm not experienced with them, or maybe, when I'm testing it out, it just doesn't feel good, but you see other people using it, right? So one of the best resources for me, at least, is Limitless VGC. So I'll leave all these links down below as well in the description, guys, but this is a fantastic website where you can basically, look at essentially what everyone is running, right? So if we just scroll down here, you can see all the past events, right? So for me personally, when I'm looking at these teams, looking at, some events with 47 players, these aren't too bad, but I like to normally look at, events with at least 100 plus players. So for example, we see the Blackthorn City here, right? We'll click on this one, 119 players, won by Stephen Mop, very talented player. And I want to know what Metagross can do, right? So, wrong one. We go to the metagame tab here. So I'm looking for Metagross, right? Let's go down here. We see 6 Metagrosses, 45% win rate. Did anyone have a good result? Not really. 4 and 3, not really what we're kind of looking for here, right? So, I'll jump back to the drawing board, and we'll see here, bang, here, the Himi Burns Tour, the Himi Turner Tour had 250 players. Do we get a Metagross? I believe a Metagross plays pretty high in this one. Am I incorrect? Maybe I'm talking out my ass here. We'll go back to the metagame tab. Anyway, really quickly here, we'll pull it up. Metagross here. We see a 6 and 3. So 6 and 3 is not too bad. How were they running it, right? So they're running with Chen Pao, which I do think is very good, and I think Chen Pao should almost always be paired up with Metagross. He's running Assault Vest, which again is the most, in my opinion, the best item, and he's running basically, the moveset we kind of just touched on there, right? And then you can just kind of look at the partners as well. We see D-Knight, Incin, Ogreborn Water, and Fluttermane, all very, very good, right? Anyway, you can continue looking through the Limitless Tours here. Basically, I do believe there was a particular team that did get... I might quickly try to find it just before we move on. Was it the Nino Tour? One of them won a massive tour, I'm pretty sure. Was it Tommy's Tuesday? I'm sure this thing just won a big tour. Was it this one here? No. Dude, you should have done this research first. Okay, we got one here in top 4. Oh, yeah, okay. Second place player at Worlds here. We'll have a look at this team. This is, you know, a fantastic person to look at here. Okay, so we see a Assault Vest there. We see Terra Dragon as well. Clear body, you know, Heavy Slam, Psychic Fangs, Bullet Punch. And, you know, actually, let's just copy this team into our team builder right now, right? Because we can kind of, I guess, discuss why I think, you know, these moves are run on this one in particular. So, obviously, Bullet Punch is your, you know, it's your priority move. On a mon that's pretty slow, having, you know, very good priority is obviously fantastic. Heavy Slam here is obviously, you know, it's primary stab move, really. It allows you to hit, you know, a lot of, you know, fairy types for, you know, a lot of damage. It's just really, really good. Psychic Fangs, another move it basically just got in Generation 9. Also a fantastic, you know, stab move. And also has the ability to break screens as well, which I do think is very, very underrated. And then Stomping Tantrum, basically this mon cannot hit fire types or steel types, really. I mean, you can hit fire types with Psychic Fangs, but it's still not the greatest. So obviously having an option like Stomping Tantrum is fantastic, right? And then he does have the Assault Vest here, which is something we will dive in deeper when we start looking at my teams. And then he did opt for Terra Drag. Now, at the time of, you know, testing this team out, I did actually opt for Terra Water, and we will get into that shortly. But I think both Terra Water and Terra Dragon are very good. Obviously, you know, Dragon gives you a better matchup into like the Fire Water Grass Claws, for example. But obviously Terra Water is just a more neutral defensive typing. So it really comes down to what you want. I personally think Dragon is probably better. In the teams in particular, in which I'll show you, we did have Water on it. But you could definitely switch out either or. I think they're both still very, very solid, right? But basically, I'll quickly run through a couple more resources just to help you guys kind of get a better understanding, I guess, of how I like to do research on my mons, right? So we'll go to that one shortly. We got Peakalytics here. So Peakalytics, a fantastic website. They have the usage stats of the mons. You know, you can see their most used moves, their teammates, items, abilities, you know, even EV spreads. If you're someone who's not confident in, you know, using your own EV spreads, Peakalytics is fantastic. You can come here, you can just steal their EV spreads. It's great. So we'll go here. We'll just type in Metagross, right? So Metagross, we can see here, 6% usage, pretty decent. Bullet Punch, Psychic Fang, Stomping Tantrum, Heavy Slam. Perfect. That's the moveset we've got. Assault Vest is its most used item. Perfect. That's what we got. Clear Body, that's what we got. And then we can look at spreads here as well. And then obviously, you know, as well, partners here. Yeah. So you can look at all that yourself. That's pretty good. Lab Mouse here is another great resource. This one's pretty new, but you can go here, same thing, type your Pokemon in. You can look at research. You can see what people play with it, all that kind of stuff. Top Cut Explorer is another fantastic resource as well. This is another one I'm a big fan of. Obviously, doesn't really do anything for us right now, simply because we've not had a regulation F tournament, at least at the time of recording this. I'm sure shortly after this, though, there will be one that goes up. But basically, they are just got the kind of resources I like to use, especially when researching mons, right? Especially when you're trying to build around an individual mon or, you know, a team, for example. I guess one other thing I'll quickly show you too is actually VGC data. VGC data is another great, this is a Twitter page. Basically, they do compile a lot of like the usage stats. Obviously, as I said before, at the time of recording this, we only have really online tours to go off. We don't really have any regionals yet. But you can go here, you see here, like, for example, day 2 teams. And then you can start seeing like top cores, right? You know, they got, you know, the top 5 Pokemon paired together, or 6 and 5, you know, forwards. Obviously, you do start seeing a lot of the same cores here, just because these are, you know, definitely some of the better cores to run together. And that's why you see a lot of repeating ones. But obviously, as the format develops, these, you know, you'll get a lot more better stats, right? So now what I want to do here is talk about flow charting, and basically, you kind of ignore the bottom half of this page. I have kind of just spoiled half of my team here. But essentially, you know, what I like to do when I sit down is, right, I'll put down the Pokemon like Metagross, right? So what is this mon's strengths, right? Well, has a really good attack stat, has very solid, you know, priority and Bullet Punch. Now, I'll also add, I do not, you know, especially when I'm like doing this at the start, I'm not going to sit here and type out an essay about, you know, all Metagross's strengths. Normally, if I'm sitting down building a team for a regional, I will. If you guys didn't see my, you know, my, what's it called? English is hard sometimes, man. My team recap for the Brisbane Regional, you can see a much more in-depth version of this, in particular when I ran, you know, my Chiyu Flutterfish team. So you can check that out. You know, I sit here, okay, what's this mon do? Has a really good attack stat, good priority with Bullet Punch, right? Has a pretty bad matchup with, you know, Incineroar, right? And then you have a look here. I say, you know, teammates need to beat, you know, fire, ground, steel types, which obviously, you know, with our, what's it called? Our Stomping Tantrum. Fire and Steel we can deal with ourselves, but obviously, you know, we're very weak to these 3 types, right? Especially if they're faster than us, can cause a lot of trouble, yeah? And I said, you know, this mon needs a defensive Terra, trades 50-50 into Flutter Mane. Basically, the reason it trades 50-50 into Flutter Mane is Flutter Mane can, you know, threaten a one-shot on you if it specs Shadow Ball, and obviously you can threaten, you know, a one-shot on it with Bullet Punch in the right situation, right? And then you see here, I said max attack only is a 62% chance to KO no bulk Urshifu. That's referring to, you know, my Psychic Fangs. These are just things I knew at the top of my head, right? And then I start writing down things like, okay, bad matchups, King Gambit, Landorus, you know, both Landorus forms, Incineroar, Golden Go Entei, Urshifu, Single Strike, Heatran, Chiyu, and Gouging Fire. Right now, obviously not all of these are just like straight losses, right? You know, these last, 3, 4 mons here, or those 3 there in particular, I can Stomping Tantrum them. Same with Entei and Golden Go. Incineroar, obviously, I can Stomping Tantrum as well. Same with Kingambit. Like, there are lines into these mons. These are just the bad matchups from, say, the top, 20, 30 mons that I thought were worth, basically adding, right? So, as you can see here, this was the first, iteration of the team I'd put together here. And I'll quickly pull up the spreads on that one for you guys. All right, so as you guys can see here, this is basically the first iteration of the team I put together, right? So essentially the mindset with this team was like, I essentially want to be able to use Qian Pao, right? As, the basically the mon to buff it up with, Sword of Ruin. I think these two together are very good. Having, that Bullet Punch paired up with Sword of Ruin is just a fantastic option, right? And basically these two mons here in particular, they don't really deal that much damage to steel types, right? They're also, pretty weak to Fairy or Fluttermane in particular. So I wanted to really just add a strong fire type to the team, and I thought that a choice banded Entei was very, very good here. Now, one of the biggest issues I have with both Entei and Metagross being on the same team is I think they do both really like having the Assault Vest item, right? But essentially, I ended up saying, you know what, we'll go a bit bulkier on the Metagross, and I'll talk about the EV spread shortly as well. I'm like, I'll run a little bit bulkier on my Metagross, and just go like Assault Vest with a bit of, still a pretty high attack stat. And then we're basically just going to make Entei just a damage bot, right? This mon's job is essentially to go in there, click its Sacred Fires, its Flare Blitzes, potentially clean up endgames with E-Speed. And yeah, that's essentially the job with it. And again, these 3 here in particular pair incredibly, incredibly well together, right? Then essentially I was, if we go back to our sheets here, you'll see I eventually did start noting down, basically issues with the team, right? Or, like, not issues with the team, sorry. I ended up started just, like, jotting down ideas, right, for each of the mons, right? Pairs really well with other physical attackers, can threaten a one-shot on Fluttermane, right? Poor Incineroar matchup, which is, again, another reason as well why we went with Entei. Inner Focus improves that Incineroar matchup quite a lot. And then you see here, weakened to Intimidate in general, very squishy, right? Pairs well with, and then, the concept behind this mon and, like, what it does good, is pairs, with physical attackers to apply a lot of pressure. Right, so that was essentially, the idea. We need a good physical attacker. We need something that doesn't just lose to Incineroar. And obviously, something that isn't necessarily just weak to like Fake Out plus Intimidate, which is another massive reason why Entei also kind of filled this slot, right? And then you have a look at here, we're talking about Entei, its strengths, it can't be intimidated or faked out, has a broken signature move and a very good matchup into Fluttermane, which the team was very 50-50 with prior to, right? One of the weaknesses, Banded locks you into moves, which, isn't great, and can be overwhelmed by strong Pokemon. Essentially, this mon does not want to go up against things faster than it. That is one of the biggest issues it has if they, have 2 Pokemon faster than you, and they just W and kill you, right? Concept of this mon, though, pairs well with Qian Pao to deal a lot of damage and spread burn. Essentially, its signature move being Sacred Fire, it's busted, right? It's a very, very good move. And I think when you're spamming it, especially on a Qian Pao team, is very good. Because if it doesn't one-shot you, it has a 50% chance to burn you, which I do think is very, very nice, obviously. Then essentially, I was looking at the team, and I was like, okay, how do I want to round this team out, right? And I was theory crafting a lot of things, and I basically just pulled one of the most broken cores, essentially, in the metagame, and that is the Lando, Tornadus, plus Urshifu, right? So these 3 mons here basically give us a very good secondary mode. So what I was kind of looking at was, I'm like, well, Metagross and Qian Pao, neither one like fire types. And while Entei obviously helps out with fire, obviously can switch into the fire types, it can't really deal that much damage outside of Stomping Tantrum, right? So how do I fix, such a poor matchup into other fire types, or at least, the ability to switch into it and also apply pressure? So I ended up thinking, you know what, Rain Dance paired up with Landorus and Urshifu Rapid Strike is just very, very good. Ended up opting for the Choice Scarf variant of Urshifu Rapid on this team as well, simply because Choice Scarf Urshifu does not necessarily need Tornadus to function. It can also pair incredibly well with Qian Pao, right? Basically, with the Sword of Ruin plus Terra Water Surging Strikes, and of course Unseen Fist, you can make a lot of pins, right? There are a lot of situations where some mons, even if it's a neutral hit, just can't take the Surging Strikes, especially with Qian Pao on the board, which means Urshifu can just take one KO, and Qian Pao can also just put a lot of pressure on the other one, right? Not to mention, this mon also pairs incredibly well with Tornadus, and of course Tornadus to setting up the Rain Dance. If your opponent doesn't have Tailwind, you can always just go Rain Dance, and then with the Choice Scarf, you're going to outspeed most things anyway. And then of course Landorus just kind of fixes up really the main issue this kind of core had, which was these 2 mons in particular are really weak into Raging Bolt. And Entei and Metagross, while they aren't necessarily bad into Raging Bolt, they don't have fantastic matchups either. It's kind of closer to 50-50. Qian Pao can obviously threaten it with an Ice Spinner, but it's not necessarily, it's not great to really only have one answer, and that's why Landorus kind of fits so perfectly with these 2, right? So essentially, if you want, you can read it all here. I'm not going to go through all of the strengths and weaknesses because we are going to talk about basically the 4 different iterations of the team. But yeah, you can kind of read it all there. I didn't go super in depth with a lot of this because for the most part, this was all written before I did any testing, until really I got down to the general notes, right? But as you can see here, I said, for the general notes, this team, basically Trick Room can be a problem. Scarfed Urshifu is also an issue, and Amoonguss is an issue, and Rain is an issue, right? So as you can see here, I basically played 20 games with the team. I went 10 and 10, right? I said the team felt good, but it has too many hard matchups. Essentially, when there wasn't an auto loss matchup, this team felt incredibly strong, right? And when there was an auto loss matchup, or certain matchups that were incredibly hard, for example, as you see here, Scarfed Urshi, Amoonguss, Rain teams in general, it was very, very hard to pivot around. Now, I will add on top of that too, this was my first time ever using, this, no, I don't want to say ever using a core like this, but it was my first time using, half of these mods, right? I haven't really used Landorus Eye, especially in Rain. I also hadn't really played all around much with, obviously, Entei or Metagross, right? So this team was still pretty new to me, right? But I ended up deciding to make some changes, right? So here we have Team 2, or the, the secondary core of the team, right? So I'm going to quickly pull that up here in Showdown. So as you guys can see here, I did obviously change out the back end of the team. I went with the Rillaboom, Wellspring, Ogerpon, and Raging Bolt. I also decided to end up changing the Metagross set here because I dropped the Tailwind. I was like, well, there really isn't any point in me having, that 107 speeds here, which I guess is something I did not touch on either with that last team. But essentially, we were 107 because we had Tailwind on the team, right? So because we dropped the Tailwind, we ended up just dropping our speed stat and just, maxing out our attack stat just to get a little bit more out of this mod, right? So why did we end up going with Rillaboom, Ogerpon, and Raging Bolt? Well, if we go back to here, we see, Trick Room is an issue. How do you beat Trick Room? In my opinion, one of the best ways to beat Trick Room is obviously stalling out the Trick Room. How do you do that? Having Protect on your mons is very, very good. Obviously, if you have a look at the team here, don't have a Protect here. We've got it here. We don't have a Protect here either. So adding in Ogerpon here with, the Spiky Shield, and of course, Raging Bolt here with the Protect, obviously gives us 3 Protects, plus we also have Redirection in Follow Me, and now we have Fake Out support in Rillaboom as well, right? Rillaboom is also another one that pairs really, really well with Chen Pao. It kind of fills that same role that Urshifu had, where this is just a really strong physical attacker that can do a lot of damage next to the Chen Pao. And look, Terra Grass, Miracle Seed, Grassy Glide in terrain next to Chen Pao also it's pretty damn good, right? But essentially, if you have a look at this team here, also we'll go back to this one here. If you have a look at the weaknesses, right? So kind of touched on our Trick Room, and it says now we have ways to stall it out. Scarfed Urshifu was a problem, so now we have, we've just essentially added 3 water resists, right? So if you have a look at the team here, Rillaboom obviously, resists the water moves. Ogerpon is immune to them with Water Absorb, and Raging Bolt is also, it resists them here with either the Grass, Terra typing, or obviously its neutral, its neutral typing in Dragon. Not to mention, we can also threaten a one-shotter here with as well with the Thunderclap. And then I've also said Amoonguss is a problem. How do we solve the Amoonguss problem? Again, we just added, 2 Grass-type Pokemon here, and a Terra Grass Pokemon as well. So that obviously, fixes up that matchup quite a bit as well. And then finally, too, Rain can be an issue. Again, we just added 2 grass types, another water type, and an electric type, all of which are very, very good into Rain, right? So I do think these 3 in particular obviously really added to it. Not to mention Ogerpon and Rillaboom, obviously, they kind of add on to the Qian Pao combo, right? You now have 2 more really strong physical attackers that can pair up with Qian Pao and do a lot of damage. And they also just offer great support. Not to mention, one thing too is, I think Calm Mind Raging Bolt on this team in particular was a very, very big upgrade. In testing this, I started realizing how broken setup was, especially with the, enough support, right? I truly think, having a setup mon in every team is very, very important, especially when you're running so many mons like, these 3 in particular, where they're kind of there to break through, right? Their job is to break a hole in the enemy team, which then would allow your Raging Bolt to kind of set up and sweep through from there, right? So anyway, if we go back here, again, you guys can read this. I'm not going to go through each one of them as to, I guess where they're good, and kind of how they work. But, I go through their strengths, their weaknesses, and the concepts as to how I kind of think they function with the team. And then we can see down here, the general cores for the team from the first team to the second one have changed quite a bit. If you have a look at the basic cores for Team 1, we had Qian Pao plus physical attackers, or Tornadoes plus really the Rain combo, right? Whereas now we have Qian Pao plus physical attackers again, but now we also have a Raging Bolt plus a support mode on the team. Basically, what that means is this guy's going to click a Calm Mind. These, really 3, 4, really all of them, depending on obviously the matchups, they're all there to do certain things, right? Raging Bolt, Ogerpon Water can redirect for you. Rillaboom provides the terrain, which pairs up the leftovers when you have such a high HP stat like this as well. Obviously, very, very good. Not to mention Fake Out support and priority to snipe things like Flutter Mane, which could obviously threaten out the Raging Bolts, right? Not to mention, Grassy Glide plus Thunderclap is also a very, very strong combo. Entei as well, again, more priority with the E-Speed. We also have Sacred Fire as well to burn, potential threats that could eventually sweep through. Chen Pao and Metagross, they kind of do the exact same thing as what we just touched on before, right? But basically, now we have a look at the results from the team. So again, I played 20 games with the team. I went 14-6. This was all on the best of 3 ladder as well. I'm not too sure if I did mention that. But basically, my notes for the team was the team felt much better. Calm Mind Raging Bolt was a huge addition. Fake Out plus Redirection also felt super nice. Only thing missing would be an Intimidate mon. Incineroar in the Entei slot is worth trying. So essentially, that is how I got to Team 3. So with Team 3 here, obviously, I ended up deciding to try out the Incineroar in the Entei slot. Now, I'm not going to lie, again, you can read this here if you want. That's basically my notes on the Incineroar. But essentially, things did not go that well. As you can see here, I did say a well-played Raging Bolt is very hard to deal with. That is one thing I noticed when playing this team, right? Having Raging Bolt was really hard. There was obviously ways through it, but it was not a very easy matchup at all. And I went 6-4 with the team, and I said, wasn't a huge fan of the Incineroar edition, didn't feel like it did enough. I think the team could use an Intimidate mon, worth testing Landorus Therian form. So that was basically my concept, right? I really did like the 5 outside of the Incineroar on this team. Incineroar, it honestly just didn't feel like it came to enough games like Entei. Entei felt really good in some matchups, whereas Incineroar was like, oh, I could bring Incin, but like maybe Rillaboom's just better here. And like, do I really want to go like Rilla, Incin plus like Bolt? Like, it's not bad, don't get me wrong. But it just felt awkward at times. It also kind of like put me in a position where I didn't like not having, you know, the U-turn on Rillaboom, which did feel really, really awkward at times. So yeah, because of that, I was like, you know what, the team still functioned okay, but I wasn't such a big fan of Incineroar. So the last one I really wanted to test was the Landorus Therian. So with the addition of the Landorus Therian on this team as well, guys, I ended up deciding to change things up just a little bit. I ended up deciding to test the Choice Band Metagross, going back to an Assault Vest Rillaboom, which is without a doubt one of the best ways to play this mon. This also kind of gave us a second, you know, mon, sorry, really a third one that had ground coverage as well. Because as I said before, one of our biggest issues we had with this team was a Raging Bolt, right? And of course, we just went with the Choice Scarf Landorus, which I also think was very, very nice because having like U-turn pivoting, I think is really good when paired with Raging Bolt. Not to mention, it just gives us a really, really good matchup into obviously opposing Raging Bolts, right? So here's my notes on the team. Again, you know, you can see why, you know, there's my notes on Raging Bolt and how it kind of, you know, supports the team. And I think what it does good and what it doesn't, you know, do great. And basically, my general notes with the team here was team feels really solid. I like both teams 2 and 4. I would have to continue testing. Basically, I only played around 60 games total between these 3 teams, right? Or sorry, these 4 teams. And I do think teams 2 and team 4, so this one and then the other one with obviously the Entei, were the best variants, right? Now, again, I could test these teams for, I would probably honestly have to test them another 20 games each before I could really come up with any, you know, kind of solid answer as to which one is better. But I kind of hope like that really just explains to you guys essentially like my thought process, especially when building these teams, right? So anyway, guys, that is how I like to, you know, obviously build teams, especially, you know, when I'm working from the ground up, working with them on I've never used in particular, especially like Metagross there. Now look, obviously all links and, you know, teams, I'll put all, you know, 4 versions of the team down below in the description as well. All links as well to, you know, the resources I use will also be down there. But I guess let me know what you guys think. Obviously, this is the first time I've ever really done a team building guide. And I'm worried I kind of didn't articulate myself perfectly. But essentially, they're the steps I go through, right? I do a bunch of testing, I write down a bunch of notes, and then, yeah, I basically continue going on from there. And I do think, you know, obviously, it is worth always testing something. If you ever think, you know, for example, I'm sitting there, I was like, hey, you know, maybe Entei could be an Intimidate mon. I tried Incin, it didn't work. I'm like, look, Intimidate did feel nice, but I don't think Incin was the guy. Obviously, test things like Landorus, right? So, I guess that's, for me, at least one of the most important takeaways is test everything. If you think something might be better, test it because you never know. There's a lot of small tweaks that, you know, you can make that, you know, like it changes a lot for the team, right? You know, for example, my Brisbane team, I made a last second change like a week before, ended up being massive. I really, really enjoyed it. But yeah, anyway, guys, let me know down below what you think. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.